At 17, I learned exactly where I stood in my family watching Brandon blow out candles on a three-tier cake while my own birthday sat forgotten beside a fridge, humming in the dark. Mom whispered Marin doesn't need much, and Dad didn't even look at me. I thought the worst part was being invisible. I was wrong. Years later, at a winter family meeting, they laid out color-coded debt spreadsheets and assigned me 70% of the burden because I was fine. But they didn't know the truth. Not about the loan Brandon took under my name. Not about the money I built alone. And definitely not about the conditions I was about to set. By the time I turned 17, the imbalance wasn't subtle anymore. It was a spotlight. Brandon's 18th birthday looked like a movie scene. Balloons tied along the driveway, music blasting from rented speakers, a crowd of relatives holding phones up like paparazzi. Mom wheeled out a three-tier red velvet cake with sparklers crackling on top. The air smelled like sugar and smoke and pride. Brandon grinned so wide his dimples practically cut his face in half. My birthday was 5 days later. I came home from school to a half-eaten grocery store cake, sitting lopsided in the fridge, the frosting smeared by someone's careless finger. The kitchen light flickered as I stood there still wearing my backpack, staring at a cake that even the house didn't want. Dad walked by, glanced at me, and said, "Heat your dinner if you're hungry." I didn't mention the date. I just cut a thin slice, the knife scraping louder than it should have. I swallowed the sweetness and the hurt in the same breath. I didn't know it then, but that silence would echo for years. College made everything clearer. Brandon's tuition books apartment covered by a family fund I didn't know existed. Mom mentioned it casually one afternoon, stirring soup, like she hadn't just split my world open. When I asked why I hadn't been told, she didn't even look up. "You're independent, Marin. You manage fine." The words hit me harder than any slap could, so I worked, stocking shelves before dawn, coding small freelance projects at night, walking home through cold air that bit at my fingers. Some nights, the only warmth came from Nova, the stray kitten I'd found behind my apartment complex. I kept her because she didn't expect anything from me, because she looked at me like I mattered. Then came the winter of 2018. Snow piled against the windows, melting into thin rivers on the glass. Brandon burst into my apartment, breathless, papers in hand. "Just sign this, please." "It's nothing." I signed without reading, half asleep from a double shift. The radiator hissed behind us, filling the room with warmth I mistook for safety. I didn't know it then, but that signature would become the crack that split everything open. Years passed. I built a life through discipline and exhaustion. I rose through my company. I met Harper, whose presence felt like stepping into sunlight without flinching. She celebrated every win I had, even the ones I never told my family about. And slowly, quietly, I started to imagine a future that didn't revolve around being an afterthought. Until the day my phone buzzed with a message from Mom family meeting. "Sunday. Come home." And just like that, the past uncoiled itself and came back for me. The Sunday of the family meeting felt colder than it should have. Winter sunlight hit the windshield in thin, sharp lines as I parked outside my parents' house. The place looked the same as always. Gray siding, overgrown bushes, the front porch light still broken even though Dad kept saying he'd fix it. But something in the air felt different, heavier, like the house itself knew what it was about to demand from me. When I walked inside, the smell of stale coffee and lemon cleaner clung to the air. Mom and Dad were already seated in the living room, their usual spots. Mom on the recliner closest to the fireplace. Dad on the couch's far end, like he was trying to disappear into the cushions. Brandon sat in the middle knee, bouncing Emily next to him, with her hands folded so tightly her knuckles were white. "Good you're here," Mom said, her tone clipped businesslike. "We can finally start. No hello, no warmth. Just an agenda." On the coffee table, papers were spread out in a messy, fan statements, past due notices, credit summaries highlighted in thick yellow strokes. The room seemed smaller as I stepped closer, the air dense with expectation. My pulse thudded in my throat. "What is all this?" I asked. Dad ran a hand down his face. "Brandon's had a rough year. The job market's tough. And there were some unexpected expenses. Unexpected." The word hung like a bad smell. Brandon cleared his throat, barely meeting my eyes. It's not as bad as it looks. It's worse, Emily whispered, but no one reacted. Not even him. Mom leaned forward, elbows on her knees. Your brother and Emily are behind on the mortgage. The car loan is 3 months overdue. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. The legal situation has created temporary strain. So that was what this was about. Money. Their money. My money. And what does this have to do with me? I asked quietly. Mom didn't flinch. Well, Marin, it makes sense. You're single. No kids. Stable job. Good income. You can help more than we can. There it was. Served like a simple fact, like gravity, like something I should thank her for pointing out. And by help, I said you mean cover everything. Dad slid a printed sheet toward me. A chart. We've broken down the numbers. Your portion is in yellow, 70%. Mortgage catch-up, tuition arrears, legal retainer, monthly estimates. My name written beside each one like an assigned chore. My chest tightened. Why 70%? Because you can, Mom answered, tone flat. You always manage. Always. The word stabbed deeper than she realized. Brandon shifted uncomfortably. Look, we really need it, Marin. Need. That was always the currency with them. For a moment, the room blurred at the edges. The ticking wall clock grew impossibly loud. I felt my thumb move to the silver ring, turning it the way I did whenever I felt myself shrinking. Harper's voice echoed in my memory from the night before. Just because you've always been the responsible one doesn't mean you owe them your life. But standing there, facing their expectant eyes, old habits wrapped around me like chains. So you're asking me to bail you out, I said. Mom's jaw tightened. We're asking you to step up for your family. The irony burned. Emily spoke suddenly, voice small but trembling. We should have told her sooner. Brandon shot her a warning look. Told me what I asked. She opened her mouth but closed it again. Nothing. It's not, this isn't the time. Dad cleared his throat sharply, shutting the moment down. He pressed the chart closer to me. Just look it over. I stared at the columns, the bold red numbers, the yellow highlights marking my supposed responsibility. The room's silence pressed against my ears until I could hear my own heartbeat. Mom folded her hands. We know you'll come through, Brandon added almost casually. I mean, you're always fine, right? That line. That careless, entitled line. It snapped something inside me quietly, cleanly, like a thread pulled too tight for too long. But I didn't explode. I didn't cry. I didn't even raise my voice. I just looked at each of them, memorizing their expressions, their assumptions, the way none of them seemed to realize they were draining the last piece of me. I'll need 24 hours, I said. And for the first time in my life, they didn't hear the warning underneath. When I stepped outside, the cold slapped my face hard enough to steady me. I sat in my car with the engine off, watching my breath fog the air. 24 hours. They thought it meant I'd go home, panic, move numbers around, and come back ready to rescue them. But the silence in that car wasn't panic. It was clarity. I drove home with no music on, no news, nothing but the hum of the tires on asphalt. Harper was sitting at the kitchen island when I walked in. Her scrubs wrinkled from a long shift hair tied in a messy ponytail. The overhead light softened her face. You're late, she said. But her voice wasn't annoyed, it was careful. She could read me too well. They want me to bail out Brandon, I said. Her eyebrows lifted. What kind of bailout? The kind that swallows my entire year? Harper exhaled slowly, leaning back. Of course they do. I dropped my bag on the floor and slid into a chair. They had everything printed, color-coded. My name next to every major cost. And you didn't say no. I said I needed 24 hours. She stared at me, eyes narrowing. You're not actually considering it, are you? I didn't answer. My silence was enough. She moved closer, placed a hand on my shoulder, grounding me. Marin, they don't ask. They expect. There's a difference. I turned the ring on my thumb, the motion familiar, calming. They said I'm single, no kids, stable, as if that means I'm on standby for emergencies. Harper shook her head. You're a person, not a safety net. But the truth was, I had spent years being exactly that. Later that night, after Harper fell asleep on the couch, with a blanket over her legs, I opened my laptop. The bluish glow lit up the room as Nova curled against my hip. I started pulling up my accounts, checking savings investment portfolios. Line after line of disciplined choices, sacrifices, long nights working 2 shifts, none of which my family knew about, because they'd never asked. As I scrolled, an email notification popped up, my company's award announcement from the previous week, Senior Innovation Achievement. Harper had taken me out to dinner to celebrate, insisting on dessert even though we were both too full. I still hadn't told my parents. Something inside me clenched at the contrast. After reviewing my finances, I opened a blank spreadsheet. At first, I intended to calculate if the request was even possible. But as I typed, something shifted. Columns multiplied totals, projections, loan structures, interest, another column terms. By the time the clock hit midnight, I wasn't planning a bailout anymore. I was building conditions, boundaries. The next day, Emily texted me. "Can you meet for 5 minutes before you talk to them?" My stomach tightened. Something in her tone felt urgent. I met her outside my parents' house near the mailbox, leaning slightly from years of winter storms. She looked nervous, her breath a thin cloud in the cold air. "I need to tell you something," she said, voice trembling. "Something Brandon never will." I waited, pulse-steady eyes on hers. "In 2018, those papers he had you sign." Her voice cracked. "They weren't just forms. He opened a loan using your social security number. He was supposed to tell you. He didn't." For a moment, I stopped breathing. The cold seeped deeper past my coat into my bones. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I whispered. "I was scared," she said. "Scared he'd lose it. Scared your parents would blame me. But when I saw those bills yesterday, I realized you deserve the truth." The truth hit me like icy water. Brandon had committed fraud, and Mom and Dad had known. At minimum, they hadn't cared enough to ask questions. I felt something inside me click into place. Not anger, not even betrayal, just understanding. "Thank you," I said quietly. Inside the house, I could hear voices, Mom giving instructions, Dad moving chairs, Brandon pacing, preparing for the version of me they thought would walk in. Emily gently touched my elbow. "Please, don't let them eat you alive." I gave a small, cold smile. "I won't." And I meant it. For the first time in my life, I meant it down to the marrow. I pulled the folder from my bag. The papers, neatly arranged inside statements, evidenced the loan contract I'd drafted, the terms I intended to lay down. 24 hours had passed, and I wasn't coming back as their afterthought. I was coming back as someone they couldn't ignore anymore. The living room was already staged when I stepped inside, like they were preparing for an intervention I was supposed to surrender to. The curtains were half drawn, letting in a thin gray light that cut across the carpet. Mom stood by the fireplace with her arms crossed. Dad hovered near the table. Brandon paced in short, anxious steps. Emily sat small on the edge of the couch, eyes flicking to me the second I walked in. No one noticed the folder in my hand. "You're late," Mom said, her voice clipped. "We really need to resolve this today." I took off my coat slowly, deliberately letting the silence fill the room. I said 24 hours, and I'm here. Dad gestured to the coffee table. "We've updated the numbers. I won't need your numbers," I said. That sentence shifted the air like a crack of thunder. Brandon stopped pacing. Mom's mouth tightened. Dad's brows creased as if he wasn't sure he'd heard correctly. I walked to the table, placed the folder in the center, and flipped it open with 2 fingers. A neat stack of documents fanned out: financial summaries, investment statements, retirement accounts. Mom blinked. "What is all that context?" I said. Dad leaned in first. I watched his eyes move down the page, watched the confusion break into shock. He lifted another sheet, then another. His breath hitched. Mom snatched a page from his hand. "What these numbers can't be right." "You never said you never asked," I replied. Those words landed hard, slicing clean through the tension. Brandon froze, hands half raised like he wasn't sure whether to defend himself or disappear. Emily stared at her lap, jaw trembling. Mom swallowed. "Marin, why would you hide this?" "I didn't hide anything," I said. "You just never cared to look in my direction." The room went silent, heavy, suffocating. I reached into the folder again and slid a new document forward. "This is the only set of numbers I'm willing to discuss." Brandon picked it up before Mom could. "Is this a contract?" Yes, I said. If you want my help, it will be structured. Repayment plan, interest financial counseling, monthly installments starting immediately. Mom recoiled as if the papers burned. You want your own brother to sign this? I want accountability, I said. Something this family has never required of him. Dad cleared his throat. Marin, this is extreme. What you asked me to do was extreme. I met his eyes. Covering your mortgage, your debts, your legal fees. 70% of a crisis I didn't create. Brandon's voice cracked. We're family. Exactly, I said softly. And family shouldn't treat one member like a spare tire. Emily suddenly stood. Tell her, she whispered to Brandon. Tell her the truth about 2018. Brandon stiffened. Mom shot Emily a warning look. Sit down. But Emily didn't sit. Her voice rose, shaking but firm. He used your social security number to take out a loan. Marin, he lied to you. And everyone here knew. The air shattered. Dad closed his eyes like the truth was too bright. Brandon's face drained. Mom said nothing, guilty by silence. How long have you known? I asked, voice barely above a whisper. No one answered. I nodded once. Then this contract is generous. Mom stammered. Marin, we didn't want to burden you. You burdened me the moment you decided my life mattered less. The room stilled. Even the refrigerator hum in the kitchen seemed to fade. Finally, I capped the moment with the line I'd carried like a blade. I'm not here to fix what you keep breaking. I closed the folder, slid a pen across the table, and stepped back. You have 24 hours, I said, echoing their own demand. The same time you gave me. And for the first time in my life, they understood I wasn't bluffing. I walked out before anyone could speak, before guilt or habit could claw its way back into my spine. The cold air hit me like a clean reset. My breath fogged in front of me, drifting upward as if even the winter wanted to pull something off my shoulders. Harper was parked at the curb engine, running hands wrapped around a coffee she must have grabbed on the way. When she saw me, she didn't ask what happened. She just unlocked the door. I slid in the heat, wrapping around me instantly. Nova's carrier sat in the back seat. Harper must have known I wouldn't want to go back inside that house tonight. She reached over, her fingertips brushing mine. You okay? I'm clear, I said. And the surprising part was, it was true. As we pulled away, I glanced back at the house. Through the window, I could see Mom standing stiffly, Dad leaning forward as if reading the contract again, Brandon pacing with his hands tugging at his hair, Emily whispering, likely urging him to do the right thing for once. They weren't celebrating. They weren't relieved. They were facing themselves for the first time, and none of them liked what they saw. We drove into the city streetlights flickering over the windshield. My phone buzzed with a notification, my email draft, the one I'd prepared the night before. The subject line glowed on the screen. Financial boundaries effective immediately. I hadn't sent it. Not yet. But knowing it existed gave me a sense of power I'd never felt in my entire life. At home, I set the folder on my kitchen table. It didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like a line drawn in permanent ink. The conditions inside weren't weapons. They were structure, fairness, a chance for my family to grow up. Still, as I poured myself a glass of water, I couldn't ignore the faint smile pulling at my lips. They thought today was about me giving them money. They didn't realize I'd handed them the one thing they'd tried to avoid for decades: accountability. I walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Harper wrapped her arms around my waist from behind, her chin resting on my shoulder. What happens next? She asked softly. I watched the street below, the quiet movement of people living their own lives unburdened. They wanted a savior, I said. What they got is a system. And as the heater hummed gently beside us, I let the truth settle in. They thought they'd cornered me, but all they did was give me the perfect opportunity to rewrite the rules. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe. Stories like mine aren't rare. Too many of us grew up being the dependable one, the quiet one, the one expected to carry everyone else's mistakes. If this hits something in you, stay with me. There's more coming, and trust me, this story isn't over.